Hello everyone. So in continuation with the previous lecture on photosynthesis, today we will be talking about the photosynthetic pigments. So photosynthesis will not be possible in plants without the pigments that can actually absorb the different wavelengths of light and then convert them or then use them in the production of chemical forms of energy. So these pigments will capture the solar energy which is required for photosynthesis. Now, these pigments are of two types, essential and accessory. The essential pigments are always present in all different kinds of photosynthetic organisms. So here we can see that there are two essential pigments, chlorophyll A, which is an essential pigment in all eukaryotic photosynthetic organisms, and bacteriochlorophyll, which is a photosynthetic or rather an essential photosynthetic pigment in prokaryotic photosynthetic organisms. And then comes the second category of pigments, which is accessory. So accessory pigments might or might not be present. It's not necessary that they have to be present there. So these contain chlorophylls B, C and D, then carotenoids and phycobilins, which are two very important categories of pigments which we'll be discussing further in the lecture today. Now talking about chlorophylls. So chlorophylls are present in all oxygenic photosynthetic organisms. There are 5 types of chlorophylls: chlorophyll A, B, C, D and E. Now these are lipid soluble pigments and they can absorb the light most strongly in the blue and red wavelengths of light, but poorly in green portions of the spectrum. And these are chlorine or porphyrin derivatives. Okay, so as you can see the structure, there are different rings, and then the central magnesium ring which is linked to 4 nitrogen atoms. So this entire structure, it's a very big structure, and this depicts the structure of chlorophyll. I'll be discussing the structure of chlorophyll in a separate video. The next thing that we had talked about in essential pigments was the bacteriochlorophyll, which is present in anoxygenic photosynthetic organisms, and like chlorophyll it is also of 5 types: A, B, C, D and E. And it will absorb light at higher wavelengths as compared to the chlorophyll molecules. So out of the 4 chlorophyll molecules that we talked about, chlorophyll A is an essential pigment while B, C, D and E are accessory pigments. Next category is that of carotenoids, which are accessory pigments, and they are of 2 types. There are 2 classes rather: xanthophylls, which contain oxygen in their structure, and carotenes, which are purely hydrocarbons and they do not contain any oxygen. So these pigments are long chain conjugated hydrocarbons which are distinguished by a string of they are distinguished from each other by their end groups, like we talked about in xanthophyle and carotenes, where xanthophyle contains an oxygen molecule while the carotenes do not contain any oxygen, and their absorption spectrum is 400 to 500 nanometer. And then comes the phycobilin, which is also an accessory light harvesting pigment, and this is present mostly in red algae and cyanobacteria. This is a non-cyclic structure and it has a linear tetrapyrrole structure. So you can see in the structure there are 4 rings, tetrapyrrole rings, and it's a non-cyclic structure, and this is water soluble, while the other 2 pigments like chlorophyll and carotenes, they were lipid soluble. Phycobilins are water soluble, so this is what makes it different from the 2 other classes. And phycobilins also are divided into 3 classes: phycoerythrobilin, phycocyanobilin and allophycocyanobilin. So different organisms contain different classes or different types of phycobilins.